Hey Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks for joining me today. If you'd like to support my channel, please check the link above to my Patreon page. I'm here now with part 2 of my sideboarding guide for my blue-green Merfolk list, now that Rivals of Ixalan is going to be released this coming Monday on Magic Online. The main deck is over here, if you guys need to need a reminder of what the card choices are there. I explained in the previous video my methodology for choosing the cards. Basically, I took the list of potential choices and copied them underneath each matchup, and then sort of deleted all the ones that were not good. So you can see that Grixis Death Shadow, Dispel, Negate, Relic, Shaper Sanctuary, and Dismember, all solid cards against Grixis Death Shadow, with certain cards like Dispel and Relic and Shaper Sanctuary being stronger than the others. So they get this purple color, which added in a power score that ended up being a multiplier for the relevance of that particular card's choice in the sideboard. And I did that for every matchup. For the top 13 decks in the format, which makes up the top 67% of the metagame, ultimately, choosing to run, I think it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the 9 cards I was looking at. Only Gutshot performed poorly enough in the metagame analysis for me to not include it in my sideboard. So that's what all the colors are. Yellow up here, green, and pink represent neutral. Good is green, neutral is yellow, and bad matchups with this pinkish red. And so with all that stuff sort of explained, I think I can just sort of go ahead and go through what to take in and what to take out for each matchup. One thing I didn't mention in the previous video is that I stuck in these rows here where I also just assessed how useful or which matchups Kira and Spell Pierce are good in. And looking quickly at both of them, you can see that they show up in a lot of different matchups. They're great against a ton of the top of the format. So I think just kind of justified for me the inclusion of Kira in the main deck. If we look at the top 13 decks, you have Kira actually showing up as good against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the top 13. And of those 7, it's got a purple sort of power rating in 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. So it's actually excellent against 4 of the top 13, including the number 1 deck, and and it's otherwise just great against 7 of the top decks. Where Spell Pierce, sort of similar, shows up as being great against a lot of the top 13 decks in the format, the top 67% of the metagame share. So, yeah, let's get started. We're going to look at Grixis Shadow first because it makes up the largest metagame percentage of any deck in the format, with 11 currently, according to MTG Top 8. So, you can see we've got counterspells coming in, Dispel and Negate. We've got Spell Pierces already doing a good job. Relic will keep their graveyard sort of trim, so Snapcaster doesn't get any value. And it might make it harder for them to cast their Delve spells, especially if you get Relic online early. Gurmag, Angler, and Tasigur might be impossible for them to cast. Shaper Sanctuary is a card that I'm sort of excited to test now that I'll be getting back on Magic Online and just jamming a lot of leagues against really competitive decks. If I come up against Grixis Shadow a lot, I think that landing Shaper Sanctuary on turn 1 can help win a lot more games. Shadow is an even matchup, but after sideboarding, you want to gain as many points as possible, and Shaper Sanctuary, I think, is a very good way to do that. And the Singleton Dismember does good work. It can pick off a little Death Shadow or very easily a Tasigur or a Gurmag Angler. Now, since they don't have a lot of threats, removing one of them can be a big deal, so Dismember is very welcome. Let's go ahead and take a glance at a recent well-performing Death Shadow list. So you can see they don't have a ton of threats. They've got their Death Shadows. Oh, I'm sorry. This is actually a Jund list. Let me go back and pull up a Grixis list. So yeah, here we see they have the Gurmag Angler and Actually, no Tassigers in this list. Very interesting. And Death Shadow. So Death Shadow they play very often when they're at something like 10 life comes down as a 3/3. You can pick that off with a Dismember. Same with Gurmag Angler. They've got a lot of instant spells. They've got some. This guy's got some Dismembers. You've got your Kolaghan's Command, 4 Fatal Pushes. You're not going to want to counter Ops, but it is an instant in case you're at the end of the game and you just want to shut the opponent out, counter their Opt. Don't let him draw anything better. You can counter their counter. Got Team or Battle Rage in this list. That's spicy. You can counter that. That's an instant. You're often not going to counter Thought Scours. Let's see what they have in the sideboard. Anger of the Gods. That's great for negate. We're going to want to play around those. Very interesting thing to note is that there are very, very few decks in Modern right now that play any board wipes in the main. Basically, if it's not Eldrazi running All Is Dust or Blue-White Control running Supreme Verdict, you do not have to play around board wipes on game 1. So if you're playing against Grixis Shadow in game 1, feel free to just go as wide as you want in game 1. Like, play all your creatures as fast as you can. Actually, go wide strategies are one of Death Shadow's biggest weaknesses. So we can really try to capitalize on that. But do be aware that even though virtually no decks play board wipes in the main, many of them have them in the sideboard. So as we see here with this Grixis list, we have 2 Anger of the Gods to worry about. So keep that negate for Anger of the Gods. Spell Pierce, really, really good against Anger of the Gods. We can keep developing our board, leave 1 mana up to counter their board wipe. Something else to look out for against Grixis Death Shadow is Flaying Tendrils. It's 2 black, 1 colorless instant that gives your creatures -2/-2. Now, my list in particular is strong against that card because I've got a lot of lords. So if I have 2 lords on the table, Flaying Tendrils is no good because all my creatures will have 3 toughness. Okay, so in the sideboard we have a couple of artifact destruction spells, a bunch more removal. So going back to my my chart here, you're going to take your Ether Vials out. This is a really grindy matchup. We don't want to get an Ether Vial blown up by a Kolaghan's Command. And if the opponent brings in additional artifact removal, we blank that by taking out our Ether Vials. Yes, we have a couple of relics, but we can just crack a relic and draw a card if the opponent ever tries to remove a relic. So take out the Ether Vials, take out the Spreading Seas, because they already have islands for us to walk on. And since we're bringing in 9 cards against them, 2 Dispels, 2 Negates, 2 Relics, 2 Shaper Sanctuaries, 1 Dismember, I had to cut 1 more card. Now, Curse Catcher is a great interactive card. Shuts off powerful spells on turn 3, like Kolaghan's Command. So we want to push those spells back. Command Speaker, very aggressive, but we still have 3 in the deck after trimming 1. I chose not to cut any of the 2-drops or higher because we're looking to have good top decks in games that want to go kind of long, and Grixis Death Shadow can really grind. So 9 spells in, 9 spells out. Let's keep moving. I can't take too long on each matchup since there's more than 20 to look at. Green-Black Tron. Let me go ahead and close that Death Shadow tab. All right, so Green-Black Tron. What are we dealing with here? We've got big mana. We've got crazy Planeswalkers. What's our strategy for this deck? Ceremonious Rejection, number 1 in this matchup. It hits almost all their spells. Obviously, they're little spells, Ancient Stirrings, Fatal Push, Sylvan Scrying. These are not the spells that are going to kill us, right? What's going to kill us is Wormcoil Engine, World Breaker, Walking Ballista, Ulamog. From the sideboard, probably got more to worry about. Oblivion Stone is going to wreck us. And Ceremonious Rejection is a 1 mana answer to these 6 drops and 7 drops. So Ceremonious Rejection, absolutely coming in. Disdainful Stroke hits anything 4 mana or bigger. We saw a lot of that in that deck. This is definitely coming in. Negate. Relatively few creatures in this deck. We can see they have 7 creatures, but many more other spells, right? We've got the Karn Liberated. We've got Ugin the Spirit Dragon. Costs 8. So Disdainful Stroke, almost as good as Ceremonious Rejection in this matchup. Negate, again, pretty much another Disdainful Stroke. Although Disdainful Stroke, very important to note, unlike Negate, can hit a Wormcoil Engine or a World Breaker, basically a creature. whereas Negate can only hit non-creatures. Negate's still an all-star in this matchup. Now, Natural State, we do want to bring in because in the early part of the game, they're playing all this stuff like Chromatic Spheres, Chromatic Stars. Those are not the best targets. Best targets are Oblivion Stone and Expedition Maps early in the game. If they tap turn 1, Expedition Map, and we have no other plays, we just maybe want to cast Natural State on turn 1, set them back on their mana development. Now, after the sideboard, let's see, they've got another Oblivion Stone, for the playset of Oblivion Stones. I would definitely, like, if they play that out with 3 mana on the board, don't have enough mana to crack it right away, if they don't have Tron online yet, we can destroy that with a Natural State. It's 3 CMC or less, so Natural State hits it. So bringing in 2 Natural State seems like a good way to either set them back of their mana or prevent a board wipe with Oblivion Stone. So 2 Ceremonious Direction, 2 Disdainful Stroke, 2 Negate, 2 Natural State, that's 8 in. We're going to take out all 4 Curse Catchers. We do want to be aggressive against Green-Black Tron. We don't want to totally change our strategy, so taking out 1-drops might seem counterintuitive, but Curse Catchers are really not going to counter anything. So they lose the value of Curse Catcher's ability. He's basically just a 1/1 vanilla Merfolk, which is not a very strong card. So I feel fine taking out the 4 Curse Catchers. 3 Spell Pierces. Now, they can hit some spells early in the game, so they can be valuable. And you guys might disagree with this. Again, if you disagree with any of this stuff, please share your comments. I'm taking them out here just because I have much better counter magic coming in. And then Kira, there's just not a lot of stuff targeting our creatures. They're just going huge. They're either wiping our board with Oblivion Stone, wiping our board with Ugin. I mean, Kira can protect against Karn exiling one of our permanents, but not much else. I mean, they have some Warping Whales and stuff. But I feel like this is the best strategy. 8 in, 8 out. All right, let's keep moving along. Let's see. We've got Burn, which is, as you can see by the green color up here, a favorable matchup. So we're not going to bring too much in, take too much out. 2 Dispels, 2 Negates in. And then I'm taking out Kira because they're usually throwing the Burn at our face. Taking out 1 Reejerey because we don't want to get our 3-drop killed by a 1-drop Lightning Bolt. Not good tempo. And since these are the only 2 3-drops in my deck, we can actually trim lands. So I would take out a Mutavault in order to not set myself back on my colored sources. So trimming 2 creatures, a Mutavault, and then depending on whether I'm on the draw or the play, I'm going to take out a Spreading Seas on the draw because it's quite slow. However, on the play, Spreading Seas is quite good. If the opponent plays, say, a Sacred Foundry on turn 1, when we play our second land, we can just put Spreading Seas on their Sacred Foundry and hopefully really slow them down. Spreading Seas great on the play, not so great on the draw. Harbinger, good on the draw because he can bounce the opponent's creature and gain us some tempo. But on the play, not as good as Spreading Seas. So cut these 3 either on the play or the draw. Cut 1 Spreading Seas on the draw, 1 Harbinger on the play. Moving on. Well, actually, first, let's see. Let's take a quick look at a burn list, typical burn list. Now, you might want to bring in Natural State to hit Eidolon of the Great Revel, but it's only a 4 of in their deck. Lists either play Eidolon of the Great Revel or Shrine of the Burning something or other as their only enchantments or artifacts. So it's just not enough targets, really, to merit bringing in Natural State. But there's a ton of instants and sorceries to hit with our negates and dispels. Now, Burn actually became a much better matchup when I shifted the list towards playing more Spell Pierces, because Spell Pierce is just one of the best cards against Burn. Burn doesn't play a ton of lands, so Spell Pierce, they can very rarely pay for the tax that Spell Pierce is charging them. All right, so moving on, we've got Eldrazi Tron, which, as we can see from the top, is kind of a neutral matchup. Ceremonious Rejection, Disdainful Stroke, going to be all stars here. Kira is decent because she prevents their spot removal, also makes it harder for the opponent to do work against us with Walking Ballista. So you can see here 7 spells in. Got 2 Ceremonious Rejections, 2 Disdainful Strokes, 2 Natural States, 1 Dismember. Let's go ahead and look at an Eldrazi Tron list. Now, the Natural State is designed, or included rather, to kill things like Chalice of the Void, expedition maps. And from the sideboard, they have some stuff like Pithing Needle. I might want to name Ether Vial. Might want to name Mutavault. Either way, if it's relevant, we can destroy it with natural state. Destroy a Ratchet Bomb just as they're ticking it up. You know, they spend multiple turns getting it up to 2, and then we just destroy it with a natural state. It's a very strong play. So plenty of targets for natural state to bring in, and Dismember is great because it kills like all their creatures. Endbringer's a 5/5, Matter Reshaper. We don't really want to destroy this guy, but otherwise, Reality Smasher, Thought-Knot Seer, Walking Ballista. Not really Wormcoil Engine. We're going to hope to get this guy with a Ceremonious Rejection, maybe bounce him with a Harbinger. So again, looking at the sideboard strategy, we've got 4 counter spells coming in, 2 natural states, and a Dismember. We're going to take out the 4 Curse Catchers. Similar reason for why we take it out against Green Blacktron. They're just going so big that Curse Catcher doesn't really do very much. And we'll take out the 3 Spell Pierces again. Eldrazi-tron has even more creatures than Green Blacktron, so not as many targets for Spell Pierce. And again, their mana is going really big, so Spell Pierce can get outclassed really quickly. 7 in, 7 out. So that's it for Eldrazi-tron. The next matchup is going to be Jeskai Control. The sort of headlining card of this deck, I think, is Spell Queller for me. Quite difficult to work around. Our best answer against this deck is Ether Vial. Spell Queller can even catch creatures cast with Cavern of Souls, because he's not countering anything. He's just sort of like holding it in his little lantern here. So looking at our sideboard strategy for Jeskai, let's slide over a little bit here. I categorize this as an even matchup, but it requires very careful play. Our counter spells are good against all of their instants and sorceries. Relic is good to keep Snapcaster off of value. Shaper's Sanctuary, if we can get it down early, is amazing because they have basically no way to deal with it. And Dismember as a singleton is solid to get rid of a Spell Queller that is holding one of our important spells hostage. Kira is obviously an all-star. Spell Pierce is insane. So what are we doing for our sideboard here? Well, 2 Dispel, 2 Negate, 2 Relic, 2 Shaper Sanctuary, 1 Dismember, 9 spells in. And one of the cool things about Merfolk is if an opponent plays Islands, we can just take out our Spreading Seas and immediately open up 4 spots that are now available for stronger cards in the matchup. So we don't want to bounce the opponent's creatures. We can take out the Harbingers, take out all 4 Spreading Seas, and I chose to take out 1 Kumena Speaker as one of the less influential cards. The matches go long, and we're going to get into top deck mode. I'd rather be hitting things like Silvergills, Lords, and Kira. So take out one of the Kumena's Speaker, take out the Spreading Seas and Harbingers, and I think our matchup gets really strong post-sideboard against Jeskai Control. Slash midrange. The deck can be described as either, and it tends to be the same list. So moving on, we've got Humans, which I consider a pretty even matchup. Kira is decent here because even though they don't have a lot of spot removal, they do have Reflector Mage that Kira can counter. Kira can block, let's see what that guy's name is, Kite Sail Freebooter or something? Yeah, Kite Sail Freebooter. They've got 4 of these flyers, which can otherwise be difficult for us to interact with, but Kira just sort of stonewalls them because the 1/2 doesn't line up well against our 2/2. Mantis Rider, probably their best card against us. 3/3 Vigilance Haste, doesn't tap, so Harbinger can't really bounce it. Let's check out what our strategy is going to be. Now, one thing I didn't mention while I was looking at the list over here is that it is a 5-color list. They play a ton of Rainbow lands. They've got Cavern, they've got Mana Confluence, Unclaimed Territory. One of the things that their strategy hinges on is Ether Vial, because Ether Vial, obviously, like in our deck, doesn't care about the colors of the casting cost. So for me, bringing in Natural State is an easy decision. If the opponent keeps a sketchy hand with an Ether Vial, we can just win the game with a Natural State right away. We can see they also have some artifact stuff in the sideboard. They might bring in Aethersworn Canonist against us since they think we're going to play a bunch of creatures at once. We could destroy that guy with a Natural State. And that might be just about it. Maybe they bring in a Spellskite, I don't know. But even just for Ether Vial, Natural State is a decent choice. And we've got 1 Dismember. We don't have a lot of Sideboard hate against humans. We just have to sort of do our best. We can see, though, they don't have a lot of hate against us either. Staticaster, I guess, but we don't have a lot of 1 toughness in this list. And that might be it. Vithian Renegades destroys an artifact that could wreck an Ether Vial. It's a little bit rough. But yeah, they have just about as much as we do in the matchup. So we can take out our Spell Pierces because they don't have any non-creatures for us to target with Spell Pierce, and bring in the 1 removal spell and the 2 artifact destruction spells. All right, give me a second. I'm going to fill up my water real quick. The next matchup is going to be Affinity. You guys know this is a bad one. Fortunately, we've got Ceremonious Rejection and Natural State, which are amazing in the matchup. And the Singleton Dismember, we've got Kira as sort of a clutch blocker. Give us another turn, maybe. So let's go ahead and look at a sort of typical Affinity list. We're going to want to hit with the Natural State something like a Cranial Plating. Maybe... see, Arcbound Ravager not the best because he can dump his counters onto somebody else. But say like a Vault Scourge, that's all suited up with Cranial Plating. It really depends on the board state and the list that's being played. Natural State can even hit like an activated Inkmoth Nexus. A lot of lists play, all lists play Steel Overseer. That's probably the best target other than Cranial Plating. And yeah, just they play a deck of artifacts, so Natural State is obviously amazing. Ceremonious Rejection, be careful because it can't hit Vault Scourge, because Vault Scourge is actually a black card. But pretty much everything else, other than Galvanic Blast being a red spell, pretty much everything else is colorless. So yeah, we're gonna bring in 2 of those, 1 Dismember. We're gonna take out 3 Spell Pierce, and it looks like I didn't finish this one, so maybe you guys can help me make a decision here. We've got we need to take out 2 more cards. Now, Spell Pierce, I chose because they have very few non-creature spells that we want to counter. So, yes, it'd be great if we hit a Cranial Plating, but we can't be holding up mana all the time, and we already have a better counter spell in Ceremonious Rejection. So, we're leaving Kira in. Maybe we can take out the 1 Regery, because he's hard to get to with the mana. And, you know, we just don't want to be tapping out to play 1 creature in this very fast matchup. But you know what? Maybe you keep the Regery. We want early aggression, but Curse Catcher doesn't actually counter very much. So maybe I'll keep the Regery since he taps stuff. We might want to bounce things with Harbinger. Although Affinity is turning their guys sideways for us. Tricky. I'll just say 1 Regery for now and 1 Curse Catcher. Okay, because Curse Catcher is not really going to be catching many curses here. Spreading Seas happens to be a very good card in the matchup because it gets Island Walk going, and it can take them off of one of their manlands. Blinkmoth Nexus or Inkmoth Nexus. You're going to want to be awake to whether the opponent is going for the Infect kill or for the just regular life total kill. If your life total is low, you're going to want to hit a Blinkmoth Nexus, but if they've got like a big Arcbound Ravager with a bunch of counters on it and a bunch of other artifacts to sack, be aware that he could go big with the Inkmoth Nexus and kill you with 1 shot with Infect, in which case you probably want to put Spreading Seas on the Inkmoth Nexus. Yeah, so that pretty much covers Affinity. We've got 5 cards in, 5 cards out. If you've been looking so far, this sort of mix and match approach to sideboarding, instead of going with like 3 ofs and 4 ofs, ends up with having typically a lot of cards to bring in for a lot of matchups. You can see the smallest so far has been Humans and Burn with 3 and 4 spells coming in, but many of the matchups have 7 or 9 really strong cards coming in. So that brings us to Storm, which I've rated at about even, typically because we have strong sideboard hate against them, and we have a really strong plan A. If they don't get their combo going, we can kill them by turn 4 very often, since they're really not killing our creatures. So we have 2 Disdainful Strokes coming in, 2 Dispels, 2 Negates. So that adds on top of the 3 Spell Pierces for a total of 9 counter spells. That's really solid counter magic suite. 2 relics to hopefully make Past in Flames pretty useless, and 1 dismember to try to hit one of their cost reducers like Baral and Goblin Electromancer. So that's 9 excellent sideboard cards coming in. We're going to take out 4 Spreading Seas, very easy decision. 2 Harbingers, because they're not really attacking usually with their cost-reducing creatures. And if they've got 1,000 goblins from Empty the Warrens, Harbinger's not going to help very much. But he still is a 2-drop creature that can attack. Then we're going to take out our Kira, because they're not going after our creatures very often. And then Marrow Regery is just a little bit expensive. And these guys, again, being our only 3-drops as a package, we can cut the land count a little bit. Since we're just on 2-drops now, I'm going to trim a Mutavault and run 18 lands in this matchup post-board. So that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 out. And again, 9 very strong cards in the matchup in. Looking at a recent Storm list, let's see. They've got basically all instants and sorceries. Actually surprised to see they only run 2 Electromancers. I thought they ran 4 of each. Basically, the rest of the deck is all instants and sorceries. Disdainful Stroke is in here for just a couple of spells, really, but they're really important spells. Let's see, we've got Gifts Ungiven as a 4 of, and we've got Past in Flames as a 2 of. So these are really the 2 of the money cards that make the deck work, and Disdainful Stroke just shuts them down. Otherwise, we've got Negates and Dispels and Spell Pierces, covering all of our bases. So let's see, the sideboard, they don't have a ton of hate against us. They're going to bring in some Lightning Bolts to try to kill our creatures. I think they tend to side in Empty the Warrens and maybe some Shattering Sprees to try to destroy a Relic or an Ether Vial. What is Wipe Away? Oh, yes, this is a split-second return a permanent, so maybe they're going to bounce our Relic during their combo turn so that we can't exile their graveyard or something like that. But yeah, post-sideboard, I feel pretty strong in the matchup. Let's go ahead to Titan Shift, a deck that is just typically a really, really difficult matchup for us. This is the deck that I particularly started thinking more about Disdainful Stroke for. So let's see, Disdainful Stroke, Dispel, and Negate. It's 3 counter spells that help the matchup a little bit. On top of the 3 Spell Pierces, again, we're going to have 9 counter spells post-board against Titan Shift. We're going to take out 3 Harbingers because bouncing Primeval Titan is not really that great because they typically just play him out again and get more land triggers. And then we're going to take out that package again of 3 drops and a Mutavault. We're going to run 18 lands in games 2 and 3 against Titan Shift. And stay low to the ground with our 1 drops and then 2 drops, including all of the 12 2-drop lords. Try to get our guys big enough so that Anger of the Gods and Lightning Bolt doesn't bother them. And yeah, just counter their stuff and win with really fast, explosive, buffed creatures. I don't think after sideboarding that it becomes a favorable matchup. They probably bring in more sweepers. We can check here. You can see that main deck, they always run some number of these red sweepers. But from the sideboard, they've got 2 more Anger of the Gods to bring in. Another, let's say, a Beast Within as removal. What else? Well, not too much else removal, really. We just want to be able to hit these Anger of the Gods. Disdainful Stroke is incredible because it hits Primeval Titan, and it hits Scape Shift, and it hits Hour of Promise. So there's a lot of really great targets, combo spells, creatures, and non-creatures. You can see that they can also bring in Obstinate Baloth against us as a blocker who gains life. Now, Obstinate Baloth is a 4-drop, so of course he can get hit by Disdainful Stroke. I think that these lists sometimes run Thragtusk, who also gains life. He's a 5-drop instead of a 4-drop, also gets taken care of by Disdainful Stroke. So, compared to how I had previously been set up against Titan Shift, I actually wasn't running any Negates, I wasn't running any Disdainful Strokes. This list, especially with the three main deck Spell Pierces to try to push back the board wipes, is much better set up than my previous lists were. So I'm feeling better about the matchup. Continuing, we're at Dredge, which makes up 4% of the meta share, and I think it's a pretty even matchup. I'm going to have a sip of water here. We've got a 2 of Negate, which is important, most important for, if we go over here to the deck list, most important for their conflagrates. We do not want to lose our board or lose our life total to a conflagrate. If we can counter this, then we're usually going to win the game, I think. Otherwise, if we've got a Negate in hand and they go for Cathartic Reunion, that can be incredible because Cathartic Reunion is a very, very powerful spell in Dredge. Otherwise, I mean, they might bring in some removal in Lightning Axe that we can counter, potentially Ancient Grudge if they try to destroy our Ether Vial or Relic or something like that. Negate is in here basically for Conflagrate, but there are some other good targets. And then Relic, of course, just cripples Dredge's plan. So you can see Relic getting a power rating here with an early bonus because we want that in our first 1 or 2 cards. Kira is decent because she protects our board from getting wiped with Conflagrate, and Spell Pierce good also against Conflagrate. We're going to take out that package of 3 drops and 1 land. So we're going to run it as, again, 18 lands, 2 drop pressure, and we'll trim 1 Spell Pierce since we're bringing in 2 negates. And they don't have a ton of non-creatures that we're really that interested in countering other than Conflagrate. All right, so that's Dredge. Moving along, we're blue-white control, and we're getting into the last 3 decks where you can see we're below 4% of the metagame, which in theory means that you should expect to see blue-white control, lantern control, and devoted company each about once every 33 games, which is a bit wild, but it happens. I don't want to say games, I meant to say matches. At once every 33 matches. Again, these numbers are probably off from MTGO numbers, but they are prominent decks that you will come across, so you should be prepared for them. Now, against blue-white control, we've got a lot of good stuff. Again, all 3 counter spells here. Ceremonious Rejection doesn't really work, but Disdainful Stroke is okay. Let's look at the list. Disdainful Stroke against their... let's see, what are they bringing in from the sideboard? They're bringing in Elspeth, which is fantastic. We really want to counter that. And yeah, that's pretty much it from the sideboard that Disdainful Stroke hits. But in the main deck, they have more Planeswalkers. They've got Gideon, Jura, Gideon of the Trials, Jace, and all of those are excellent to hit with Disdainful Stroke. Then, of course, they have Cryptic Command as a 3-of that Disdainful Stroke takes care of, and very importantly, Sphinx's Revelation. If this thing resolves, it's really, really hard to win. So I wanted to mention there, while I was talking about what their sideboard was like, when we determine our sideboard strategy and we're looking at the opponent's deck, we want to prepare for what they're going to be bringing in from their sideboard, not just what's in their main deck, because games 2 and 3, when we have our sideboard cards, the opponent also has their sideboard cards. So if they're loaded up on 4 drops, Disdainful Stroke's going to be really, really good. All right. So I'm going to bring in Disdainful Stroke, but only 1 of them, because there's not like 20 targets. It's just like maybe, like 10 or something like that. Got both Dispels. Dispel is excellent because it only costs 1 mana if the opponent tries to tap our team to prevent them from losing to our attack. We countered them with Dispel and Attack for the win. It's happened so many times against control decks for me. Got 2 negates, really broad answer, very important in this matchup. 2 relics, keep them off of graveyard value. Shaper's Sanctuary is, again, this is a matchup where we want to get it down early. Every time they target anything in our deck, any of our creatures, we're going to draw a card. So this can be a match winner on turn 1. And then Natural State, surprisingly, is pretty strong against blue-white control. But we're only going to bring in 1 of them. We don't want to over-sideboard. So let me go ahead and show you why we bring in Natural State. Blue-white control plays different numbers of Detention Sphere. Some decks play 2, some play 3, some play 1 with some number in the sideboard. But Runed Halo is becoming more popular. If we have 3 Kumena Speakers out, the opponent might name Kumena Speaker with Runed Halo and then turn off all 3 of those guys. In a situation like that, we would love to blow up Runed Halo In a situation where they detention sphere a couple of our creatures, we would love to hit that with a natural state. Search for Azcanta is a 2 of. It can be very powerful. We want to destroy that. And if Spreading Seas gets put on one of our green sources or on a Mutavault, we might want to destroy that too. Otherwise, not too much from the sideboard in the way of artifacts and enchantments we want to deal with, but there are some things. Ruined Halo as an extra copy, and more important from the sideboard is the Stony Silence. We are keeping in our vials to try to dodge their counter magic and keep our tempo game going. But also we're bringing in relics, and an early Stony Silence can shut down a vial and a relic. In that situation, being able to destroy Stony Silence with natural state is really, really strong. So we're going to bring in one natural state, not both, because they don't have too many enchantments, and we can typically play around or counter some of them. So we do have a lot coming in. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we can take out all our Spreading Seas. It's an easy choice. All for Harbingers, even though they play at instant speed, which is usually good against control. We do have Ether Vial, and we're not bouncing a lot of creatures with Harbinger in this matchup, so it loses a lot of its utility. Past that, the games are going to go really, really long, so Kumena's Speaker as a top deck, not as valuable, and Spell Pierce not as valuable, because they're going to have a lot of mana in a lot of situations. But we will keep 2 Spell Pierce in to help develop our early, or defend our early aggression. All right, so that's blue-white control. Moving on, we've got Lantern Control, a really, really horrible matchup, but fortunately we've got some really strong cards to bring in from the sideboard. You can see that they're all power cards. They all have an early game preference. We'd love to have them in our opening hand so they don't get milled away by Codex Shredder. Spell Pierce as a 3 of is a godsend in this matchup. Counter really anything. Counter a Thoughtseize if we're holding a Ceremonious Rejection. It can counter Ensnaring Bridge. Spell Pierce is super welcome in the matchup. So we're going to bring in 2 each of those powerful spells, and we're going to take out our 3-drop package, including a Mutavault. Since they're not targeting our creatures, we can take Kira out. And since they don't really have a lot of blockers, we don't need to go over the top with Kira. We don't need crazy buffs with Regery. We don't need to tap down their creatures. Pretty easy cards to swap out. They do have, even though they don't have a lot of blockers, they do have a lot of utility lands. Even though we don't really need Island Walk, we do want to have access to our Spreading Seas to take them off of Academy Ruins and Inventor's Fair and stuff like that. And they don't play a lot of creatures, so let's take out some Harbingers. All right, so that's 6 in, 6 out. We gain a few percentage points post-board because of the strength of these spells. But I still don't think it's a very favorable matchup after boarding. But we're doing our best with the cards that we have. Let's take a quick look at Lantern's strategy. They've got a ton of singletons in the sideboard. Many of them going to be artifacts, I guess. Where's Welding Jar? Things that they could, in theory, search for with Inventor's Fair if they need it. Let's see, they've got 3 Ensnaring Bridges in the main deck, which is really the card that we want to see least. We won't be able to attack if Ensnaring Bridge is out, so we bring in our natural states, we try to counter it, we do anything we can to prevent this card from hitting the battlefield. They bring in some removal, Maelstrom Pulse, Pyroclasm, Abrupt Decay, which we can't counter, but Collective Brutality, stuff like that, we can counter. They bring in a Liliana of the Veil. It's interesting. Another target for Spell Pierce is Whir of Invention, which you can pay for with artifacts, and it lets you go and search your library for an artifact card. So another way for them to go get an Ensnaring Bridge, and a great target for Spell Pierce to prevent them from getting that Ensnaring Bridge. So that's Lantern Control in a nutshell. Moving along, we've got Devoted Company as the last of the top 2/3 of the metagame in Modern. And it's a pretty even matchup, I'd say. It's a difficult one, but we've got the 3 Spell Pierces to slow down their Chords and their Collected Companies. And we've got plenty more from the sideboard. Now, Disdainful Stroke, on top of hitting Chord and Collected Company, If they do get their combo online and they have a Walking Ballista, Disdainful Stroke is an answer to that. So if they don't have Duskwatch Recruiter, and the only thing they had to use their infinite mana for is the Ballista, then we're still in the game, because they can't dig for more creatures with Duskwatch Recruiter. The Disdainful Stroke definitely coming in. Dispel, very strong answer. Negate is good, but we have plenty of counter spells already. We might not need another 2-drop counter spell. Relic is useful to keep them off of like a Kitchen Finks Infinite Life combo, but that's not their main direction, and they don't really have too much other graveyard value. Dismember is probably our best card in the matchup because they are kind of a tiny creature combo deck, and Dismember can just sort of shut down their combo on turn 2 or turn 3 and give us a couple turns to hopefully mount an attack and win the game. So in the end, I decided to bring in both Disdainful Strokes, both Dispels, one Relic, only one Relic, and no negates, again, because we have the 3 Spell Pierces. We don't want to overboard. We don't want to take too many creatures out of our deck, since our plan is to attack, and we need creatures for that. And the 1 Dismember, so 6 cards in. We can take out 2 Spreading Seas, even though Island Walk is important. With all the Lords in my deck, we're going to be outclassing their creatures, and we might not really need Island Walk. And by the time we need it, we'll have had a few more turns to potentially draw into a Spreading Seas. So we can take out 2 Spreading Seas. And also they have a lot of mana dorks. So we're not really going to screw their mana with Spreading Seas. It becomes less relevant in the matchup. Another reason why Spreading Seas is relevant is it draws a card. So it helps us draw into crucial sort of sideboard answers. But we've also got 4 Silver Gills and 2 other Spreading Seas. So I felt that this was a reasonable card to cut 2 of. Then again, we're going to take out the 3-drop package and a Mutavault, trimming down to 18 lands post board, running really low to the ground with just 2 drops, trying to get our creatures big and fast while also holding up counter magic. And trim 1 Harbinger. This is okay because, let's see, the Druid, when it taps for mana, he can untap, and so Harbinger can't really bounce that guy. And so it becomes Devoted Druid. It's quite difficult to actually get an effective Harbinger on that guy. And otherwise, bouncing their creatures is not really all that useful. I mean, if we bounce a Viscera Seer, he pays 1 more mana and gets him back on the board. I mean, Harbinger is decent. We want interaction in this matchup, and we want bodies, and Harbinger is interaction on a body. But because it can be tricky to actually get Harbinger's ability to stick, we can trim 1. So 6 cards in, 6 cards out, and yeah, that brings us to the end of the top 2/3 of the modern metagame that I used to sort of derive my sideboard numbers. So I'm gonna end this video here, and I'll pick it up in the next video where I'll just go through I think 11 of the lower decks in the format that still have, sorry about the scrolling, still have pretty decent metagame share. We've got Blue Moon, Mardu Midrange with just as much as like Blue-White Control, Lantern, and Devoted Company. Just feel like you tend to see them less on Magic Online. So I'll cover some of those decks in the next video. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you have any questions, also let me know those. If you'd like to support my channel, please check the link above to my Patreon page. And I'll see you in the next video where I'll wrap up my sideboarding guide for this blue-green Merfolk list. Thanks again, guys. Bye.